Some machines stop because they break. Others stop because people stop believing in them. The prototype had been silent for 417 days, sitting beneath the white lights of Aurora Dynamics like a forgotten promise wrapped in polished steel. Engineers had tested it. Consultants had measured it. Specialists had rewritten thousands of lines of code. Millions of dollars had disappeared into reports, presentations, and confident predictions that all ended the same way. Failure. The enormous laboratory buzzed with quiet conversations and the low hum of ventilation fans as executives gathered around the motionless machine one last time. Digital displays glowed across the walls, reflecting against spotless concrete floors that smelled faintly of machine oil and fresh paint. At exactly 9 a.m., CEO Evelyn Brooks stepped onto the presentation platform, her charcoal blazer perfectly pressed, her calm expression hiding months of disappointment. She looked at the prototype for several long seconds before folding her arms. "We've done everything," she said. "Every expert agrees. This prototype will never run again." The words settled over the room like heavy winter air. A few engineers lowered their heads. Others quietly closed their tablets, relieved that the endless struggle was finally over. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered that the company should have scrapped the project months ago. Another nodded without looking up. Near the loading entrance, a man pushed a maintenance cart across the polished floor. His blue work shirt carried a simple embroidered name, Marcus. He was easy to overlook. Most people did. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, repaired lights, adjusted equipment, and quietly disappeared before meetings began. Few executives knew his last name. Fewer still realized he had been listening to every discussion for months. Marcus slowed as he passed the prototype. His eyes rested on the silent machine, not with frustration, but with quiet familiarity, almost like someone recognizing an old friend after many years apart. He noticed something no presentation slide had mentioned. He noticed something no diagnostic report had measured. He said nothing. His hands remained on the handle of the maintenance cart. The laboratory continued preparing for the shutdown announcement while signatures waited on digital documents that would officially end the project forever. Then, almost too softly for anyone nearby to notice, Marcus looked toward the motionless prototype and murmured, "It isn't dead." Marcus Carter never hurried, and perhaps that was why almost no one noticed him. While executives rushed from conference room to conference room carrying polished presentations and expensive coffee, he quietly replaced worn filters, calibrated aging equipment, tightened loose hinges, and wiped fingerprints from glass doors before the first employees arrived each morning. At 5:30 every day, long before the city skyline caught the first orange light of sunrise, his old pickup rolled into the employee parking lot with the same steady rhythm. In the passenger seat rested a faded lunchbox, a stainless steel thermos filled with black coffee, and a small framed photograph of a smiling little girl with bright eyes and carefully braided hair. Naomi Carter was 9 years old, and every afternoon she waited outside Lincoln Elementary with a backpack nearly half her size, knowing her father would never be late. That promise mattered more to Marcus than promotions, titles, or recognition. After dropping her off each morning, he crossed the quiet hallways of Aurora Dynamics with a maintenance badge clipped to his shirt, greeting security guards by name while most engineers walked past without lifting their eyes. To them, he was simply part of the building, as ordinary as the elevators or the polished floors beneath their shoes. They thanked him politely when something broke, then forgot he had ever been there. Marcus never seemed bothered. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did answer, his words were measured, calm, and unexpectedly thoughtful. During lunch, he almost always sat alone near a window overlooking the testing hangar, reading worn engineering journals borrowed from the public library instead of scrolling through his phone. Sometimes younger technicians noticed pages filled with equations sketched neatly inside a weathered notebook resting beside his sandwich. They assumed it was an old hobby. None of them asked. Inside the laboratory, conversations continued about shutting down the project forever. Charts filled giant monitors. Financial forecasts replaced technical discussions. Every conclusion sounded final. Every voice carried certainty. Yet Marcus quietly replayed something in his mind that no report could capture. It was not a spreadsheet. It was not a simulation. It was a sound. For weeks, whenever he cleaned the testing bay after everyone had gone home, he paused beside the silent prototype and listened. Not to what it was doing, but to what it was refusing to do. Machines, he believed, always told the truth if someone was patient enough to hear them. As the shutdown meeting ended, employees drifted toward the exits, speaking about new contracts and future projects. Marcus remained where he was for another moment, his eyes resting on the motionless frame beneath the bright laboratory lights. He could almost picture every hidden system beneath its smooth exterior, every connection waiting to breathe again. Then he reached into his pocket, opened the small notebook he had carried for years, and quietly wrote a single sentence before closing it again. The failure is not where they are looking. The official shutdown order spread through Aurora Dynamics before noon. Email notifications chimed across offices. Department managers received revised budgets. Project coordinators quietly reassigned engineers to newer programs that promised faster returns and happier investors. By early afternoon, the once crowded testing laboratory had begun to empty. Workstations that had been occupied for months were cleared with surprising speed, as though everyone wanted to leave behind the memory of a dream that had become too expensive to defend. Evelyn Brooks remained in the observation room overlooking the silent prototype. The thick glass reflected both the machine and the city skyline beyond it. She had built her reputation on making difficult decisions before circumstances forced them upon her. Closing the project felt logical. It felt responsible. Yet something about the stillness inside that laboratory refused to give her peace. She glanced through the final engineering reports one more time. Every document repeated the same conclusion. Mechanical integrity confirmed. Software integrity confirmed. Power systems confirmed. Unknown failure. Beyond repair. She slowly closed the folder and looked back toward the motionless frame. Down on the laboratory floor, Marcus continued replacing burned-out overhead lights as though nothing unusual had happened. His ladder stood beside the western wall while conversations drifted around him. Two senior engineers stopped nearby without realizing he could hear every word. "We even brought in specialists from Houston," one said quietly. 3 weeks of diagnostics. The other side. Then Boston. Then Seattle. Nobody could solve it. Sometimes you have to admit a machine has reached the end. Marcus tightened the final bulb without responding. His face revealed nothing, but every sentence settled carefully inside his memory. Later that evening, long after executives had gone home and security lights replaced the bright daytime illumination, the laboratory became almost silent. Only the steady hum of climate control and the distant ticking of cooling equipment remained. Marcus pushed his maintenance cart through the empty testing bay, collecting discarded cups and folded diagrams left behind during the shutdown meeting. He stopped beside the prototype once again. The polished metal reflected the soft amber emergency lights overhead. He placed one hand lightly against the cool exterior panel and closed his eyes for only a moment. Then he listened. Not with instruments, not with software, simply with years of quiet experience. Somewhere deep inside the machine, a relay clicked almost too softly to notice. Once, then nothing. Marcus smiled almost imperceptibly. "There you are," he whispered. He pulled the small notebook from his pocket and compared today's observation with pages filled during dozens of lonely evenings after work. Tiny sketches, voltage paths, timing notes, airflow patterns, and handwritten questions filled nearly every page. He turned to a blank corner and wrote another short sentence with careful lettering. "The system is waiting for permission, not repair." He closed the notebook, slipped it back into his pocket, and quietly switched off the laboratory lights behind him, leaving the silent machine resting in darkness while somewhere beyond the building, a little girl waited for her father to come home in time for dinner, completely unaware that tomorrow would begin changing both of their lives. The next morning arrived with cold rain tapping softly against the tall windows of Aurora Dynamics. Employees hurried inside carrying umbrellas and laptops, speaking about the future as though the past had already been erased. The prototype remained behind reinforced glass, disconnected from the production schedule, waiting only for paperwork that would send it into permanent storage. Marcus arrived before sunrise as always. He checked the heating system, inspected emergency lighting, and quietly pushed his maintenance cart through the silent corridors until he reached the testing laboratory. The room was empty except for the machine and the faint glow of status indicators that refused to disappear completely. Most people would have called them meaningless. Marcus did not. He walked slowly around the prototype without touching it. His eyes followed every panel seam, every ventilation opening, every cable route hidden beneath polished aluminum. He did not search for broken parts. He searched for intention. Great machines, he believed, reflected the people who built them. If something stopped making sense, it usually meant someone had asked the wrong question. He crouched beside a lower inspection panel and listened again. A soft relay clicked exactly once. For seconds later, another answered from deeper inside the housing. His expression remained calm, but his heartbeat slowed with growing certainty. He had heard that rhythm before, years earlier, in another laboratory filled with hopeful engineers who believed impossible ideas deserved one more chance. Footsteps echoed behind him. A young systems engineer named Daniel Mercer entered carrying 2 cardboard boxes filled with archived documents. He nearly apologized for interrupting until he noticed Marcus studying the machine. "You still think there is something left to find?" Daniel asked with a tired smile. Marcus stood slowly. "I think it is still trying to tell us something." Daniel laughed politely, not out of disrespect but simple disbelief. "Every expert in the country already listened." Marcus nodded. "Experts usually listen for answers. Sometimes the machine is asking a question instead." Daniel looked at him for a long moment, uncertain whether he was hearing philosophy or engineering. Before leaving, he noticed the small notebook resting on Marcus's maintenance cart. One page had been left open by the morning breeze. It contained neat sketches of timing sequences, airflow calculations, and electrical pathways drawn with remarkable precision. Daniel blinked twice. These were not random observations. They looked like the work of someone who understood the entire architecture from memory. "Did you copy those from one of the engineering files?" he asked. Marcus gently closed the notebook. "No." "Then where did they come from?" Marcus offered only the faintest smile. "Years of paying attention." Daniel carried the boxes toward the archive room, but curiosity refused to leave with him. For the rest of the morning, he could not stop thinking about those drawings or the quiet confidence in the maintenance worker's voice. Meanwhile, Marcus looked once more at the silent prototype before returning to his ordinary routine, replacing ceiling filters and polishing glass doors as though nothing important had happened. Yet hidden safely inside his pocket rested a notebook containing the first complete path back to life. And for the first time since the shutdown had been announced, someone inside Aurora Dynamics had unknowingly walked one step closer to the truth. By late afternoon, curiosity had begun moving through Aurora Dynamics faster than any official announcement. Daniel Mercer tried to return to his software models, but the sketches he had seen inside Marcus's notebook refused to leave his mind. During a break, he quietly requested access to archived engineering diagrams, telling himself he only wanted to compare a few circuit paths. Minutes later, the drawings filled his monitor. His eyes widened. The maintenance worker's handwritten notes matched the original architecture with astonishing accuracy. Not approximately. Exactly. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen while the soft hum of computers surrounded him. "That cannot be possible," he whispered. A few desks away, another engineer overheard him. "What is impossible?" Daniel hesitated before showing the notebook sketches he had recreated from memory. Within minutes, 3 engineers stood around his monitor. One frowned. Another crossed her arms. The third laughed softly. "So now the maintenance guy is solving what every consultant missed?" The room filled with polite amusement. "Maybe he has been reading old manuals after work," someone suggested. Another smiled. "Or maybe he watches too many engineering videos." The laughter was never cruel, only dismissive, the easy confidence of people certain they already understood the limits of the world. Daniel remained quiet. Something about Marcus's calm voice refused to fit their assumptions. He finally stood and walked toward the executive offices carrying a printed copy of the recreated sketches. Evelyn Brooks was reviewing budget revisions when he knocked gently on her open door. "You have 2 minutes," she said without looking up. Daniel placed the pages on her desk. "I think someone deserves 5. Evelyn glanced down. At first she expected another proposal to delay the shutdown. Instead she found elegant system diagrams covered with handwritten timing adjustments and airflow calculations. She recognized the complexity immediately. "Which consultant prepared these?" she asked. "None of them." "Then who?" Daniel took a careful breath. "Marcus, the maintenance technician." Evelyn looked up slowly. Silence settled between them. "You are telling me the man who changes light fixtures wrote this?" "Yes." She studied the pages again. Every notation was concise. Every correction addressed areas the consultants had barely mentioned. Nothing appeared random. Still, experience urged caution. Brilliant ideas sometimes looked convincing on paper while failing in reality. She folded her hands. "Does he claim he can restart the system?" Daniel answered honestly. "He has never claimed anything. He only said the machine is trying to tell us something." Evelyn walked to the window overlooking the laboratory below. Through the glass, she saw Marcus quietly replacing a damaged floor panel while employees passed him without a second glance. He worked with the same patience he always had, completely unaware that an entire conversation now revolved around him. After several thoughtful moments, Evelyn turned back toward Daniel. "Bring him to the laboratory tomorrow morning." Daniel nodded. "What will you tell him?" Evelyn allowed herself a small, uncertain smile. "Only one question matters now." She looked once more toward the silent prototype resting beneath the bright lights. "If he truly believes there is still hope, I want to hear him say it himself." The following morning, the testing laboratory felt different. Word had spread quietly through the building, drawing engineers, project managers, and department heads back into a room they believed they had already left behind. The prototype stood exactly where it had always been, silent beneath rows of bright white lights, while conversations echoed softly across the polished floor. Some came out of curiosity. Others came expecting disappointment one final time. Marcus entered carrying nothing but his worn notebook and a small maintenance toolkit that looked almost ordinary beside the expensive diagnostic equipment surrounding the machine. Evelyn Brooks stepped forward before anyone else spoke. Her expression remained composed, but there was a sincerity in her voice that had not been there during the shutdown meeting. "Daniel believes you see something everyone else has missed." Marcus looked at the prototype instead of the crowd. "Ido." A senior engineer folded his arms. "Every consultant in the country examined this system." Marcus nodded politely. "I read their reports." Another engineer frowned. "Then you know they proved the hardware is sound." "Yes." "The software is stable." "Yes." "The power systems passed every test." Marcus nodded once more. "Yes." The engineer spread his hands. "Then what is left?" Marcus answered quietly. "The conversation between them." Several people exchanged puzzled looks. The room became still. Evelyn broke the silence. "If you are wrong, nothing changes." Marcus met her eyes for the first time. "I understand." "If you are right?" Marcus glanced toward the silent machine. "Then someone asked it to become something it was never designed to be." No one laughed this time. His calm certainty carried more weight than confidence ever could. Evelyn took one slow breath before speaking again. "How much time do you need?" Marcus looked at the prototype for several seconds before answering. 10 minutes. One manager whispered that it was impossible. Another quietly checked his watch. Evelyn stepped aside. "You have your 10 minutes." Marcus walked toward the machine with an unhurried pace, setting his notebook on a nearby workbench before opening a single access panel. He ignored the expensive diagnostic consoles completely. Instead, he reached for a simple manual calibration tool from his maintenance kit. The metallic click echoed gently through the laboratory. He adjusted one connector by less than a quarter of an inch. Then he paused. He listened. For seconds passed. He made another tiny adjustment, this time changing the alignment of an airflow sensor no one else had touched because every report declared it operational. Again he stopped. Again he listened. The room remained silent except for the soft hum of ventilation fans and the faint ticking of cooling metal. Marcus never rushed. He closed his eyes briefly, almost as though following a familiar melody instead of repairing a machine. Finally, he opened his notebook, compared 2 handwritten timing sequences, and entered 3 small calibration values into a forgotten service interface hidden behind the lower control panel. He pressed nothing dramatic. He pulled no large lever. He simply rested one finger against the activation switch, looked quietly at the prototype, and whispered almost to himself, "Now you can remember what you were built to do." Marcus pressed the activation switch with the same calm expression he had worn all morning. Nothing happened. 1 second passed. Then 2. Somewhere near the back of the laboratory, someone quietly sighed, convinced the experiment had reached the same ending as every attempt before it. Another manager lowered his eyes toward the floor. Evelyn Brooks remained perfectly still, refusing to look away. Marcus did not move either. His hand rested lightly against the control panel while the room filled with the gentle buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant hum of the building ventilation system. Then a single indicator changed from gray to amber. It was easy to miss, little more than the glow of a tiny light hidden beneath the main console. Marcus noticed immediately. He smiled almost imperceptibly. 3 soft clicks echoed from inside the prototype, each one arriving exactly 4 seconds apart, matching the sequence written in his notebook. A cooling fan began turning so quietly that only those closest to the machine could hear it. Several engineers instinctively stepped forward. One reached for a diagnostic tablet. Another stared at the power monitor in disbelief. The display had awakened without receiving the emergency override sequence that every consultant believed was required. Marcus remained silent. He simply watched the machine the way a patient teacher watches a student remember an answer on their own. The amber light became green. A second display illuminated. Then another. Across the laboratory, dark monitors awakened one after another until the room reflected soft blue light across the polished floor. Air moved gently through the prototype's ventilation channels with a smooth rhythm no one had heard in more than a year. The sound was not loud. It was steady. It was healthy. It was alive. An engineer whispered, "The synchronization cycle is running." Another quickly checked the system logs before looking up with wide eyes. "Nobody started that process." A third voice answered almost involuntarily. "The machine started itself." Marcus quietly shook his head. "No," he said. "It simply remembered its original sequence." Evelyn walked closer, unable to hide her amazement. Every progress bar continued climbing. 10%, 25%, 40%. Sensors that had remained dormant for hundreds of days suddenly reported stable values. Temperature readings balanced. Airflow normalized. Internal timing aligned with perfect precision. There were no warning alarms. No emergency messages. Only calm, orderly operation, exactly as the original design had intended. The laboratory had been filled with confident opinions only minutes earlier. Now it held something far more powerful. Silence. Not the silence of failure, but the silence that arrives when certainty gives way to truth. Every pair of eyes followed the machine as the final startup sequence completed. A soft chime echoed through the room. The main display glowed bright white before revealing a message no one believed they would ever see again. System ready. Complete operational status confirmed. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. Even breathing seemed quieter. Evelyn looked from the display to Marcus, who had already closed his notebook and stepped away from the control panel as though his work had never been about proving himself. The prototype had come back to life, but the greatest surprise was not what the machine had done. It was the quiet man who had never once needed the room to believe in him before he believed in the machine. No one moved for several long seconds. The prototype continued its quiet operating cycle, its status lights glowing with calm confidence, as though the past 417 days had never happened. Engineers who had spent months searching for impossible answers stared at their monitors in complete disbelief. Every diagnostic line returned the same result. Stable, balanced, operational. The impossible had not merely become possible. It had become measurable. Evelyn Brooks slowly walked around the machine, reading each display herself. She trusted data more than emotion, and the data left no room for argument. Every subsystem that had once been declared beyond recovery now performed exactly within original design specifications. She turned toward Marcus, expecting to find him standing beside the prototype. Instead, he had quietly gathered his notebook, returned the calibration tool to his maintenance kit, and begun closing the access panel as carefully as he had opened it. There was no celebration in his expression, no trace of pride, only the quiet satisfaction of leaving something better than he had found it. "Marcus," Evelyn said softly. He looked up. "Who taught you to understand this system?" Marcus answered with the same calm voice everyone had heard all morning. "The people who built it." Evelyn frowned slightly. "You knew them?" Marcus paused for a moment before replying. "Very well." Daniel Mercer stood beside the central workstation, unable to ignore the question that had been growing in his mind since he first saw the notebook. He opened the company's digital archive and searched through engineering records dating back more than a decade. Thousands of names filled the screen. Old project photographs appeared one after another. Design reviews, prototype milestones, team celebrations. Then Daniel stopped scrolling. His breathing slowed. There, standing in the center of a group of young engineers wearing safety glasses and hopeful smiles, was a younger Marcus Carter. He was not wearing a maintenance uniform. He wore an engineering badge with one title printed beneath his name. Lead Systems Architect. Daniel looked at the date. It matched the year the prototype project had first begun. "Everyone," he whispered, hardly believing what he had found. Heads turned toward his monitor. Evelyn stepped closer. The room became silent once again. On the screen appeared the original design leadership page. At the very top stood one name, Marcus Carter, Lead Systems Architect, Original Control System Designer. Below the title was a short project statement written years earlier in Marcus's own words. "Great technology should never replace human judgment. It should protect it." Evelyn read the sentence twice before looking slowly back at the quiet man standing only a few feet away. "Why did you leave?" she asked. Marcus lowered his eyes for a brief moment. "My wife became very sick," he answered gently. "After she passed away, my daughter needed her father more than this project needed another engineer." No one spoke. The laboratory that had once been filled with certainty now held only respect. In that stillness, every person present realized they had spent years walking past the very man whose vision had given the prototype its first heartbeat, never once asking the maintenance worker carrying a lunchbox and a notebook what story he carried behind his quiet smile. The news traveled through Aurora Dynamics long before the workday ended, but Marcus Carter never waited to hear the conversations that followed. He returned the calibration tool to its place, picked up his maintenance cart, and quietly continued replacing a faulty light fixture in the east hallway because someone had reported it the day before. To him, keeping a promise mattered whether it involved a billion-dollar prototype or a hallway that deserved better light. Evelyn Brooks found him nearly an hour later standing on a ladder with a screwdriver in one hand and a fresh light panel in the other. She waited until he climbed down before speaking. "Marcus, I owe you an apology." He smiled gently. "There is no debt to pay." She shook her head. "I judged your uniform before I learned your story." Marcus looked toward the bright hallway that now stretched clearly into the distance. "Most people do. It is easier to see a job than a person." Evelyn stood quietly, letting those words settle. "The board wants to offer you your old position back," she said. "Lead Systems Architect, a larger office, full authority over the project, equity in the company, whatever resources you need." Marcus remained silent for a moment before answering. "I appreciate the kindness, but titles are not what my daughter has been waiting for every afternoon." Evelyn looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Then what would you accept?" Marcus rested one hand on the handle of his maintenance cart. "Give young engineers room to make honest mistakes." Let them ask difficult questions without being afraid of looking foolish. Great ideas usually arrive wearing ordinary clothes. Evelyn nodded slowly. That I can promise. Later that afternoon, Marcus's old pickup pulled into the familiar line outside Lincoln Elementary exactly on time. Naomi spotted him through the school doors and ran toward the truck with the same joyful smile that had greeted him every afternoon for years. She climbed inside, hugged him tightly, and asked the question she always asked. "How was work today, Daddy?" Marcus chuckled softly as they drove beneath the warm golden light of the setting sun. "We fixed something that people thought was beyond saving." Naomi smiled. "I knew you could." Marcus looked at his daughter for a brief moment before turning his eyes back to the road ahead. Sometimes the greatest inventions are not machines that learn to work again. Sometimes they are hearts that learn to see again. And on that quiet evening, one remarkable machine had returned to life, but something even more valuable had been restored inside every person who had finally learned that true greatness rarely announces itself. It simply goes to work, keeps its promises, and lets character speak louder than recognition ever could.